the decline of Christendom in the West leads to the rise of nationalism. It becomes a new sort of religion. And the same sort of analysis is going on with capitalism, and this is what I think Weber, in his own way, could see, that we're constantly creating gods that react back against us and oppress us, and this does not obey any distinction between religion on the one hand and politics and economics on the other hand. Marx and Nietzsche, of course, thought that once you got rid of the gods, then everything would be, then we would be liberated from this. Or Nietzsche at least thought we could start creating our own gods. But from a theological point of view, I just don't think self-created gods is the answer to this. I think what you need is a real God, a good God, and that's the argument that I try to make in the final chapter.
And just to emphasize this point, there's this quote in the book which I kind of like. We miss the similarities between what goes on in a cathedral and what goes on in a shopping mall when we try to separate them into religious and secular categories. And I think that's really true. I always have made the comparison. I don't know what the English term for those shopping sprees, holidays would be, but I guess in the US it's Black Friday or something, when thousands and even millions of people stampede to the temples of today, let's say the shopping malls. If we'd see that in India, we would think it's a Kumbh Mela, which is a pilgrimage to some sacred site. And so that's also what you do in the book, really make clear it's not necessarily about what people believe, but if you just look at what they do and where they bow their knees, so to speak, what they really think is worth it to fill their holidays with, then you kind of see what their true God is, or what the thing is that they bow to.
Right, exactly. And that's one of the reasons why I want to push back on Charles Taylor's idea of modern selves as buffered selves. If you look at the people lining up outside the Best Buy, ready to run in, for discounted electronics at midnight on Thanksgiving, these are not buffered selves. And the more we can see what's going on there, the more we have an accurate portrayal of our society.
Yeah. In a sense, you seem to be saying quite a similar thing as Durkheim has, and you talk a lot about Durkheim in the book as well, but just to clarify for some of the more scholarly listeners, if they have the sense of, but Durkheim was also already in the beginning of the 20th century talking about every society creates whatever it thinks the sacred might be, and then it creates a social structure around the sacred, but the sacred itself is not the point. It's the fact that you have something that you set apart, which you make sacred. And because it's set apart, you kind of reflect your own society in that thing which is set apart, and you think you're worshipping something, but what you're actually doing is just creating cohesion among the general society. And that for him is religion, as you fully explained. But so where would you see a distinction? Where do you go beyond Durkheim?
Well, the only thing Durkheim is lacking is God, right?
Quite something.
I mean, you remember Durkheim was, he studied at rabbinical school. He came from a long line of rabbis. I think his father and his grandfather and his great-grandfather were all rabbis. And Durkheim himself dropped out of rabbinical school at some point. And basically what I want to do is send Durkheim back to rabbinical school to finish, where he would discover that the reason people have this tendency to create these forms of worship is because there's an actual God out there, right? The reason there's a God-shaped hole in our hearts is because there's an actual God out there. So for Durkheim, there's no escape from this, right? we disguise self-worship, collective self-worship, as the worship of some god, and so we're constantly creating new gods, and there's really no escape from that. And he's fairly optimistic about that sort of thing, at least until World War One happens, right? I mean, his Elementary Forms of the Religious Life was published in 1912, and he talks about the kind of collective effervescence that we need to reanimate. You know, now that Christianity has died, what we need is this kind of collective effervescence, and he saw that in kind of French patriotism. And then his own son was killed in World War One, and that was a blow from which he never recovered, and he died just a couple years later. And that's the tragedy of it, I think, is that he saw that we create these gods, and he didn't think that we had any choice but to create our own gods. And he was optimistic that this might, in some sense, be our salvation. And I don't think that's true, right? And so I want to send him back to rabbinical school and give him a hope that there's an actual real God out there that could still save us.
Yeah, again, to be a bit of the devil's advocate, some people might say, yeah, right, in the First World War and in the Second, the nation state had fully become God, or to use your terms, the migration of the holy from the church to the state had completely happened. And so people sacrificed not only the lives of others, but their own lives for this new universal God, the state, with all the atrocities that ensued. But they might say, all fair and well, but religion before, when they were truly following God, between scarce quotes, they did just as much damage and violence and so on. So why insist on
Yep.
Durkheim should have perhaps also been thinking about the real God, and that is the gap or the hole that people are trying to fill, namely the hole of a real God that they're missing. Why return to the God which also demanded all that sacrifice in history?
Yeah, I mean it's a fair question. I mean, in general, the body counts pre-modernity were much smaller than the body counts post-modernity. You know, people talk about the Crusades and the Inquisition and so on. That kind of pales in comparison. Over the course of the 350 years of the Spanish Inquisition, for example, scholars estimate that between 3,000 and 5,000 people were killed, which is about how many people the Pol Pot regime killed every 3 days in Cambodia, right? So 350 years versus 3 days. But I don't want to just rely on statistical, body counts. I mean, I think there's no question that Christianity, Islam, other faiths can and do promote violence. People do kill for gods. They also kill for flags and free markets and the workers' revolution and on, right? So the argument at some point has to go beyond empirical claims to normative claims. And so, as a theologian, what I'm trying to do is present a normative claim that there actually is a God out there who can save us from ourselves and give us a way out of this kind of imminent trap, which is essentially violent. And so the figure of Jesus Christ is crucial to me, and that's what I tried to bring out in the final chapter on incarnation and sacrament. And it all depends on the possibility that there might be this nonviolent God who absorbs the violence of the world and doesn't give it back, and that in some sense provides the possibility of a way out of this, and so that's what I'm staking my claim on.
I'd like to delve deeper in that normative argument, but a bit more towards the end, where we can discuss some topics of the last chapter of the book.